At my husband's brother's wedding, I watched him walk his ex-girlfriend to the head table while I sat alone at a table for vendors in the back corner. When he stood up to give his speech about family values and the people who truly matter, I quietly walked to the front of the reception hall. What I announced next about who really funded their $85,000 dream wedding made every single person turn to stare at my husband in complete horror, and his confident smile vanished as he realized I had just destroyed his reputation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In front of everyone he'd ever cared about. Picture this: Ocean View Manor, the most exclusive wedding venue on the Pacific Coast, with its crystal chandeliers casting golden light over 200 guests in designer attire. The bride and groom had just finished their first dance to a live orchestra that cost more than most people's cars. Champagne flowed from fountains, the 5-tier cake was a work of art, and every single detail screamed luxury and perfection. And there I was, Victoria Chen, sitting at table 23, the vendor table, watching my husband of 12 years, Michael Sullivan, beam with pride as he escorted a stunning redhead named Sophia to the family table. Sophia wasn't just any guest, she was his college girlfriend, the one he'd dated for 4 years before we met, the one whose picture I'd found hidden in his wallet 3 months earlier. But here's what made this moment absolutely devastating. Every single person in that room, the bride, the groom, both sets of parents, the wedding party, even the vendors, everyone believed that Michael's family had somehow scraped together the money for this extravagant celebration. They had no idea that every dollar, every detail, every moment of this perfect day existed because of a secret I'd been keeping for 8 months. As I stood up from my corner table, my hands trembling slightly, I could see Michael at the microphone, beginning his toast as the devoted older brother who helped make this dream possible. His voice carried across the silent room, with that charming confidence that had first attracted me to him 15 years ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," he was saying, raising his champagne glass, "today we celebrate not just the union of my baby brother Daniel and his beautiful bride Jessica, but the power of family sacrifice and love." That word sacrifice nearly made me laugh out loud. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, my heels clicking against the marble floor. A few guests glanced my way curiously, but most were focused on Michael's speech. The wedding photographer, assuming I was part of the family, started following me with her camera. If she only knew what she was about to capture. "Because when family needs help we find a way," Michael continued, his voice growing more emotional. "When Daniel and Jessica thought they'd have to settle for a simple ceremony in a church basement, we knew we couldn't let that happen." I was now standing just 10 feet from the head table. I could see Daniel's face, glowing with gratitude toward his older brother. Jessica was wiping away tears of joy. Michael's parents looked so proud of their successful son, who had saved the day for his younger brother. And Sophia, beautiful elegant Sophia, was gazing at Michael with such admiration, such respect for this generous family-oriented man, who had sacrificed so much for love. None of them knew the truth. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through his speech. The microphone picked up my words, and suddenly every conversation in the room stopped. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Michael's face went pale. For a split second I saw panic flash across his features before he quickly recovered with that practiced smile. "Oh," he said, with a nervous laugh, "my wife Victoria wanted to add something to the toast." "How sweet." He held out the microphone toward me, probably thinking I was going to say something supportive, something that would reinforce his narrative of family generosity and sacrifice. Instead, I took the microphone and looked directly at Daniel and Jessica, then slowly scanned the room of guests who were all staring at me with polite curiosity. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I began, my voice steady, despite my racing heart, "but I couldn't sit here and listen to another word without telling everyone the truth about this beautiful wedding." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. "Daniel, Jessica," I continued, looking directly at the bride and groom, "you have thanked the wrong person." I could see Michael's jaw tightening, his eyes pleading with me to stop, but it was too late. 8 months of lies, manipulation and betrayal had led to this moment, and I was finally ready to let the truth explode. This venue, Ocean View Manor, costs $35,000 for a Saturday in June. The catering for 200 guests with the premium menu you're enjoying tonight cost $28,000. The live orchestra, the flowers, the photographer, the videographer, the 5-tier custom cake, the champagne fountains, the designer linens, the lighting, the transportation, the rehearsal dinner last night at the Harbor Club. All of it, every single detail of this perfect day. I paused, letting the suspense build as every person in the room hung on my words. Was paid for by someone Michael has been hiding from all of you. The murmurs started then, a low rumble of confusion and curiosity spreading through the crowd. I could see Daniel's face changing from confusion to concern. Jessica's hand went to her throat. Michael's parents looked bewildered, and Michael looked like he was about to be sick. The total cost of this wedding was $87,000, I announced, my voice growing stronger with each word. Not a single penny came from Michael or his family. In fact, Michael doesn't even know how much his own brother's wedding cost, because he never asked. He just took all the credit. The room erupted in whispers. I could see phones coming out as guests started recording. This was about to become very public, very quickly. Who paid for it then? Someone called out from the crowd. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me as I prepared to finally tell the truth that would change everything. That, I said, looking directly at my husband's terrified face, is where this story gets really interesting. You see, for the past 8 months, while Michael has been planning his reunion with his college girlfriend Sophia, the beautiful woman sitting at the head table, who thinks she's here as his guest, I've been living with a secret that's about to change everything you think you know about this family, about this marriage, and about the man you've all been applauding for his generosity. I handed the microphone back to the wedding coordinator and said loud enough for everyone to hear, but that story begins 8 months ago, with a phone call that broke my heart, and a decision that I'm finally ready to explain. As I walked back toward my table, leaving the room in stunned silence, I could feel 200 pairs of eyes following me. Michael was frozen at the head table, Sophia looked confused and concerned, and Daniel and Jessica appeared to be in complete shock. The truth was finally coming out, and there would be no going back. To understand how I ended up confronting my husband at his brother's wedding, you need to know about the Victoria Chen who existed 12 years ago, the woman who fell in love with Michael Sullivan's ambitious charm, and never imagined she'd one day be sitting alone at a vendor table while he paraded another woman around. I met Michael when I was 26, fresh out of Stanford Business School, with an MBA and burning desire to prove that a first-generation Chinese-American woman could build something meaningful in the tech world. Michael was 30, already established as a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, with the kind of confident smile that made you believe anything was possible. Our first date was at a rooftop restaurant in downtown San Francisco. When he walked me to my car, he said something that should have been a red flag but felt romantic at the time. "Victoria, you're going to help me become the man I'm meant to be." I thought he meant we'd grow together. I didn't realize he meant I'd be funding his dreams while he took all the credit. Michael came from solid middle-class people. His father Robert owned a small construction company in Sacramento, and his mother Patricia had been a school teacher. They were good people who had worked hard to give their 2 sons opportunities they'd never had. Michael was the golden child, scholarship to UC Davis, corporate job, destined to elevate the family name. Daniel, 5 years younger, was different. Quieter, more artistic, content to work as a freelance graphic designer. Where Michael thrived on competition and status, Daniel found joy in simple things, his art, close friends, and eventually, Jessica Martinez, a kindergarten teacher he dated for 6 years before proposing. The family dynamics were clear from the beginning. Michael was the provider, the problem solver, the one everyone turned to when things got difficult, and I became his silent partner in maintaining that image. When Michael left his corporate job to start his own marketing consultancy in our 3rd year of marriage, I liquidated my 401k to fund his startup costs. When the business struggled, I took on weekend freelance projects to cover our mortgage. when his father's construction company nearly went bankrupt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I quietly transferred $25,000 from my inheritance to help them stay afloat. Every time Michael presented these solutions as his own resourcefulness, "I'll figure it out," he'd tell his family with that confident smile. And I let him, because I loved him, and because I believed that successful marriages required one person to shine while the other provided support from the shadows. By year 8 of our marriage, my behind-the-scenes support had paid off spectacularly. Michael's consultancy had grown into a full-service digital agency with 12 employees and major tech contracts. We moved to a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Palo Alto, and I launched my own consulting firm. For the first time, we were both financially successful. Michael began sending money to his parents, money from our joint account, funded equally by both incomes, but presented as his generosity. "My dad's so proud of how I've turned out," he'd say after family calls. From the outside we looked perfect. Michael and I attended gallery openings and charity fundraisers, took European vacations, sent thoughtful gifts for every family occasion. His parents adored me, often commenting on how lucky their son was. But Michael would redirect conversations to his latest business achievements, rather than acknowledging my role in his success. When Daniel proposed to Jessica 3 years ago, the family celebration was pure joy. But reality set in quickly. They had no savings for a wedding. Their plan was a simple ceremony in a community center, followed by a potluck reception in Robert and Patricia's backyard. Michael, ever image-conscious, wouldn't hear of it. "My brother isn't having some bargain basement wedding. The Sullivan name means something." That's when he made the promise that would lead to my humiliation. "Don't worry about the money. I'll take care of everything." I smiled and nodded, believing we meant exactly that, partners solving problems together. I had no idea that within 8 months, Michael would be taking full credit for my sacrifice, while using it as cover for the most devastating betrayal imaginable. 8 months before my confrontation at Ocean View Manor, I was in our home office when Michael burst through the door with manic energy that usually meant he'd made a promise he couldn't keep. "Victoria, we need to talk," he said, pacing like a caged animal. "I may have gotten carried away at dinner tonight." I looked up from my laptop. "What kind of carried away?" "Daniel and Jessica were talking about postponing the wedding because they can't afford anything decent, and Mom was crying, and Dad looked so disappointed." "Michael," I said slowly, sensing where this was heading. "What did you promise them?" "I told them not to worry about the money, that I'd handle everything." I stared at him. "You told them you'd pay for Daniel's wedding." "That we'd pay for it," he corrected quickly, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He hadn't mentioned me during his grand gesture. "Michael, do you have any idea how much a wedding costs? How expensive could it be? A few thousand for a nice restaurant, some flowers, a photographer." I pulled up Ocean View Manor's website, the venue Jessica had mentioned dreaming about. "This place costs $35,000 just for venue rental on a Saturday in June. That's before catering at $140 per person. 200 guests means $28,000 for food. Then there's bar service, flowers, music, photography." I typed numbers into a calculator, watching Michael's expression change from confidence to panic. "For the wedding Jessica described, we're looking at $75,000 to $90,000. Michael sank into the chair. "That's more than my agency made in profit last quarter." "Exactly. We can't afford Daniel's dream wedding without seriously impacting our financial security." But Michael wasn't ready to hear that. Over the next week, he became obsessed with finding a way to make his promise work, researching costs and getting quotes. Each conversation made him more agitated. "There has to be a way," he kept saying. "I can't go back to my family and tell them I was wrong." "Do you know how that would make me look?" That phrase stuck with me. How that would make me look. Not Daniel's disappointment, or his parents' sadness, Michael's image. Meanwhile, Daniel and Jessica had taken his promise to heart. Jessica put a deposit on Ocean View Manor using her credit card, trusting Michael would reimburse her. They scheduled vendor appointments, assuming unlimited budget thanks to Michael's generosity. The pressure was enormous. Every family call included wedding updates and gratitude for Michael's incredible sacrifice. Patricia called him her generous, successful son. Robert told everyone how proud he was. Michael soaked up every word while privately panicking. 2 weeks after his promise, Michael came home looking defeated. One of our biggest clients is threatening to leave. They might cut their contract by 60%. How much of your annual revenue is that? About 30%. If they leave, I'll have to lay off half my staff. We sat in silence, both understanding what this meant for his wedding promise. Maybe this would be a good time to talk to Daniel about scaling back. Absolutely not, Michael said intensely. I am not going back to my family looking like a failure. I promised them a wedding, and they're going to get one. 3 weeks later, with vendor deposits piling up, Michael came to me with his solution. What if you used your business savings as a short-term loan for wedding expenses? I'll pay you back over the next year, but this way we can cover everything without touching our joint accounts. I stared at him. You want me to fund your brother's wedding with my business money? It's a loan. I'll pay you back with interest. And think about how grateful my family will be. We argued for over an hour. Michael alternated between pleading and guilt-tripping, reminding me of his family's kindness, our shared benefits from his success, all the reasons a good wife would support her husband in crisis. Eventually, worn down and genuinely caring about Daniel and Jessica's happiness, I agreed. I would loan him $90,000 from my business accounts. He would pay me back over 12 months with 5% interest. Our families would never know the money came from me. You're amazing, he said, kissing me with apparent gratitude. This is going to be the wedding of the century, and everyone will know it's because of the Sullivan family's generosity. As I transferred the money the next morning, I felt good about helping people I loved. What I didn't know was that Michael had already begun planning how to use this wedding for purposes that had nothing to do with his brother's happiness, and everything to do with betraying me. Once the money was transferred, and Michael regained his confidence, I threw myself into making Daniel and Jessica's wedding everything they'd dreamed of. If I was sacrificing $90,000 of my business savings, I was determined to ensure every dollar created something beautiful and meaningful. Michael's impatience with details and demanding work schedule meant responsibility quickly fell to me. Within 2 weeks, I had become the de facto wedding coordinator for an event everyone believed my husband was generously funding. Victoria's so organized, Patricia would say during planning calls. Michael, you're so lucky to have a wife who can handle details while you focus on earning the money to pay for everything. Each comment felt like a small knife twist, but I reminded myself this wasn't about credit, it was about creating a perfect day for two people I genuinely cared about. What started as basic planning quickly became an obsession. I spent evenings researching florists, tasting menus, interviewing photographers. I created spreadsheets tracking every expense, timeline, and vendor contact. I treated Daniel and Jessica's wedding like the most important project of my career. The floral arrangements alone took 3 weeks to perfect. I visited 7 florists before finding Maria Santos, whose artistic vision matched Jessica's Pinterest boards exactly. Together we designed cascading arrangements of white hydrangeas, blush roses, and eucalyptus. Cost $8,500. For photography, I interviewed 12 teams before selecting James Chen, whose portfolio captured exactly the romantic, timeless images Jessica wanted. His package $4,200. The catering required 4 separate tastings before we agreed on Chef Rodriguez's perfect menu, a fusion honoring Jessica's heritage while satisfying Michael's family's traditional tastes. With premium bar service, $32,000. Every decision went through me. Every vendor called my number. Every contract crossed my desk. Michael occasionally asked about progress, but seemed content to let me handle boring details while he basked in family gratitude. As months passed, I became emotionally invested in ways I hadn't expected. I secretly worked with Daniel to incorporate his artistic background, wedding invitations featuring his calligraphy, ceremony programs, with his sketches, favors using his artwork. For Jessica, I arranged for her kindergarten students to create a surprise video message. I coordinated with her sister to fly in their elderly grandmother, absorbing travel costs as an additional gift Michael knew nothing about. I even arranged for the string quartet to learn Cielito Lindo, a traditional song Jessica's grandmother had sung to her. These personal touches weren't budgeted items. They came from my heart, my time, often my additional money. I was creating memories that would last a lifetime. But as my involvement intensified, I noticed a subtle shift in how Michael treated our arrangement. Initially, he'd expressed genuine gratitude for my financial contribution. But as months passed and family praise continued, he seemed to forget that any success was connected to my money or work. "Michael's been so generous," Patricia said, during one planning session. "I don't know how he managed to afford all this." I glanced at Michael, expecting him to redirect some credit my way. Instead, he smiled and said, "Family takes care of family, Mom." Later, when I mentioned feeling invisible, Michael brushed off my concerns. "Everyone knows you're helping with details. But at the end of the day, this is about me stepping up for my brother." "That's the story here." "The story," I repeated. "This is our actual life, our actual money, my actual work. Don't make this about credit when it should be about family." What I didn't discuss with anyone were the hidden costs beyond the $90,000 loan. My business expansion plans were on hold. I'd turned down 2 major consulting contracts because I lacked capital for necessary staff and technology upgrades. My financial security was being compromised, and the stress was affecting my health. Insomnia, weight loss, anxiety-induced appetite loss. Most painfully, I'd started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The wedding planning had revealed something about Michael's character I wasn't sure I could accept. When choosing between honesty and image management, he would choose his reputation every time. As we entered the final month, I threw myself into remaining details with intensity that worried even me. The final budget came to exactly $87,347, not including additional personal touches I'd funded separately. Every vendor was confirmed, every timeline finalized, every contingency planned. I had created something beautiful that would give 2 people a perfect start to their married life. What I didn't know was that while I was pouring my heart, money, and skills into this celebration of love and commitment, my husband was using my work as cover for planning the betrayal that would destroy our marriage. The foundation for his deception was complete, built entirely on my sacrifice and trust, and I was about to discover just how thoroughly he intended to exploit both. What Michael's family and friends never saw were the hundreds of hours I spent working behind the scenes to make his promise a reality. While he received praise for his generosity at family dinners and social gatherings, I was the one managing every practical detail that would transform his grand gesture into an actual wedding. My days became a carefully orchestrated dance between my regular consulting work and what had essentially become a second full-time job. I would wake up at 5:30 a.m. to handle vendor calls before my clients on the East Coast started their workdays. During lunch breaks, I reviewed contract details and timeline revisions. Evenings were spent coordinating final details, managing guest lists, and handling the countless last-minute decisions that large events require. I created a separate email address, michaelsullivanwedding@gmail.com, to manage all vendor communications. Every florist, photographer, and caterer believed they were working directly with Michael or his assistant. None of them knew that the person orchestrating every detail was the wife whose contribution would never be acknowledged. The deception required constant vigilance. When vendors called our home phone looking for Michael, I had to quickly redirect them to his assistant me, who would handle all the details. When family members asked Michael specific questions about arrangements, he would casually defer to my superior organizational skills while maintaining the fiction that the funding and major decisions were his domain. Beyond the $90,000 loan that Michael's family knew about, I was quietly investing additional resources that transformed their expectations from adequate to extraordinary. When Jessica mentioned wishing they could afford a live string quartet instead of recorded music, I found a way to add $3,200 to the budget without telling Michael. When Daniel worried that his freelance income meant he couldn't properly thank his groomsmen, I arranged for personalized gifts that cost another $800. These weren't impulsive purchases or emotional overspending. Each addition was carefully considered and strategically implemented to create moments of joy that I knew Daniel and Jessica would remember for the rest of their lives. The grandmother's travel expenses. The surprise video from Jessica's students. The custom cocktail napkins featuring Daniel's artwork. These details cost thousands of additional dollars and dozens of extra hours, but they represented the difference between a nice wedding and an unforgettable celebration. I maintained separate spreadsheets tracking every expense, both official and unofficial. Michael saw only the sanitized version that showed vendor payments within the agreed-upon budget. He never knew about my additional contributions, and I never planned to tell him. This was my gift to Daniel and Jessica, separate from whatever reputation benefits Michael was gaining from the arrangement. As months passed, I realized I was developing genuine expertise in event planning. What had started as necessity was evolving into something approaching mastery. I understood the rhythms of different vendors, the seasonal pricing fluctuations, the timing required for complex coordination, and the personal touch needed to make generic services feel customized and meaningful. Vendors began treating me differently as word spread about the Sullivan wedding's scope and attention to detail. Maria, the florist, started consulting me about color schemes for other events. James, the photographer, referred clients to me for planning assistance. The catering team at Ocean View Manor began discussing their most challenging requests with me, knowing I understood both logistics and client psychology. Mrs. Sullivan, Rebecca Martinez said during one of our final planning meetings, "I have to ask, what do you do for a living? Because you approach this planning with more professionalism than most of the event coordinators we work with." I deflected the question with some vague comment about project management skills from my consulting background, but her observation stayed with me. I was good at this work. More than good, I was excellent. And unlike my corporate consulting where success was measured in efficiency improvements and cost savings, wedding planning created joy, memories, and experiences that would last a lifetime. What no one understood was the emotional complexity of being so intimately involved in planning a celebration while feeling increasingly invisible in my own marriage. Every beautiful detail I created, every vendor relationship I managed, every timeline I perfected, was simultaneously an act of love for Daniel and Jessica, and a painful reminder of how little credit I received for my contributions. I spent evenings calling vendors to confirm delivery times and payment schedules, while Michael watched television, trusting that everything would work out because Victoria's handling the details. I researched alternatives when vendors had scheduling conflicts, developed contingency plans for weather issues, and managed the constant flow of questions from family members who wanted updates on Michael's generous gift. The weight of maintaining this fiction became exhausting. During family dinners, I listened to Patricia praise Michael's sacrifice while knowing I was the one who had sacrificed business opportunities and financial security. I watched Robert beam with pride at his successful son while knowing that the success he was celebrating came from my bank account and my labor. Most painfully, I observed Daniel and Jessica's grateful appreciation for Michael's incredible generosity, while knowing they had no idea who was actually creating the wedding they were so excited about. Their thank you notes, their emotional expressions of gratitude, their relief at not having to compromise their dreams, all of it was directed toward my husband for work I was doing with money I had earned. As the wedding date approached, my hidden work intensified to a level that was barely sustainable, alongside my regular business responsibilities. Every vendor needed final confirmations, every timeline required minute adjustments based on venue logistics, every detail needed coordination with multiple other elements to ensure the day would flow seamlessly. I was working 16-hour days, managing calls with vendors during every break in my consulting schedule, and handling crisis management that Michael never knew was happening. When the original string quartet leader broke his wrist 3 weeks before the wedding, I spent an entire weekend auditioning replacements and negotiating rate adjustments. When a supply chain issue threatened the custom linens 2 weeks out, I found an alternative vendor and personally drove to their warehouse to approve color matches. Michael occasionally asked how things were progressing, but his questions were surface level and focused on whether any major problems needed his attention. He trusted that I would handle whatever came up, which I did, but his casual assumption that everything would work out perfectly began to feel less like partnership and more like entitlement. "You're amazing at this stuff," he said one evening as I coordinated final headcount adjustments with the caterer while he relaxed with a glass of wine. "I'm so lucky that I don't have to worry about any of these details." Lucky. As if my expertise and dedication were just fortunate circumstances, rather than deliberate skills and enormous effort being deployed on his behalf. Without really planning it, I had been documenting every aspect of my work. The spreadsheets, email exchanges, vendor contracts, payment records, timeline revisions, and endless coordination details created a comprehensive record of exactly who had planned, funded, and executed Daniel and Jessica's wedding. I told myself this documentation was just good business practice, the same organizational habits that made me successful in my consulting work. But subconsciously, I think I was creating evidence. Evidence of my contribution, my sacrifice, my expertise, and my investment in creating something beautiful for people I loved. This documentation would prove crucial sooner than I imagined, but at the time, it just felt like the natural way to manage a complex project. I had no idea that within weeks, I would need this evidence to defend myself against accusations and to prove truths that seemed too devastating to believe. The wedding was 10 days away, every detail was confirmed, every vendor was prepared, every timeline was finalized. I had created something extraordinary, and I felt proud of what my hidden work had accomplished. What I didn't know was that, while I was perfecting the final details of Daniel and Jessica's celebration, Michael was making plans that would turn my greatest act of generosity into the stage for my most devastating humiliation. In the 7 days leading up to Daniel and Jessica's wedding, I experienced what I can only describe as the calm satisfaction of a job well done. Every vendor had confirmed their arrival times, every detail was locked in place, and the weather forecast showed partly cloudy skies with a high of 72 degrees, absolutely perfect for an outdoor ceremony at Ocean View Manor. For the first time in 8 months, I allowed myself to feel genuinely excited about what we had created. This wasn't just going to be a beautiful wedding, it was going to be a masterpiece. Every element I had carefully selected and coordinated would come together to create something that exceeded even Jessica's most ambitious Pinterest dreams. Michael seemed to share my optimism, though for what I assumed were different reasons. While I was proud of the logistical achievement and the artistry of the event design, he was clearly basking in the anticipation of his family's gratitude and the social recognition he would receive for his incredible generosity. "This is going to be amazing," he said over breakfast, 3 days before the wedding, scrolling through his phone with unusual enthusiasm. "Daniel texted me last night to say he can't believe how perfect everything is going to be. Dad's been telling everyone at the construction site about how proud he is. Mom's been showing the engagement photos to all her friends." I smiled, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. Despite the complicated dynamics around credit and recognition, knowing that Daniel and Jessica felt supported and celebrated made every hour of work worthwhile. What surprised me most during that final week was how romantic Michael became. After months of taking my wedding planning work for granted, he suddenly seemed to remember that I was his wife, rather than just his unpaid event coordinator. He brought me flowers on Tuesday, white roses, the same variety I'd selected for Jessica's bouquet. On Wednesday, he suggested we take a long weekend trip to Napa, after the wedding was over, to celebrate what we've accomplished together. On Thursday, he made dinner reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, saying he wanted to reconnect before the chaos of wedding weekend. "I know I've been distracted lately," he said over candlelit dinner on Thursday night. "The stress of everything with the business, the pressure of making sure Daniel's wedding was perfect. I haven't been the husband you deserve." I felt my heart soften in ways it hadn't for months. This was the Michael I'd fallen in love with, thoughtful, romantic, capable of recognizing when he needed to prioritize our relationship. Maybe the wedding planning stress had affected him more than I'd realized. Maybe once this event was behind us, we could rebuild the partnership that had felt so strained lately. "I understand," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "It's been a lot of pressure for both of us, but after Saturday, we can focus on us again." He squeezed my hand and smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. I love you, Victoria, and I'm grateful for everything you've done to make this possible. Daniel and Jessica are going to have the perfect wedding because of you. It was the first time in months he had explicitly acknowledged my role in creating the wedding, and hearing those words felt like forgiveness and validation rolled into one. The Sullivan family's excitement was infectious and heartwarming. Patricia called me twice on Friday just to express her gratitude and to confirm last-minute details about the rehearsal dinner. Robert stopped by our house to personally thank Michael for stepping up when it mattered most, and to tell me how much they appreciated my help with the planning. Victoria, you've been such a blessing, Patricia said during her second call. Michael is so lucky to have a wife who can make his generosity come to life. You two make such a wonderful team. Daniel and Jessica were practically glowing with happiness. They had moved into their new apartment the week before, and Jessica kept sending me photos of wedding gifts they were receiving, thank you notes they were writing, and small details they were noticing about the upcoming celebration. I can't believe this is really happening, Jessica texted me on Friday afternoon, along with a photo of her wedding dress hanging in their bedroom. Thank you and Michael so much for making our dreams come true. I know this was a huge sacrifice, and we'll never forget what you've done for us. Reading her message while sitting in my office, managing final vendor confirmations, I felt overwhelmed with emotion. This was why the money and the work and the invisible hours had been worth it. Two people I cared about were getting the celebration they deserved, and their joy made every sacrifice feel meaningful. By Friday evening, I had achieved something I'd never accomplished before in my professional life. The execution of a flawless, complex project with no significant problems, no vendor conflicts, and no last-minute crisis management required. Every element was confirmed, every timeline was optimized, every detail was ready to unfold exactly as designed. I spent Friday night reviewing my master timeline one final time, not because anything needed changing, but because I wanted to savor the satisfaction of seeing everything perfectly organized. Saturday would begin with flower delivery at 8 a.m., followed by vendor setup, bridal party preparation, photography sessions, the 4 p.m. ceremony, cocktail hour, and reception until midnight. Every hour was accounted for, every transition was planned, every potential problem had been anticipated with contingency solutions. You look happy, Michael observed as he found me in the office, surrounded by neatly organized binders, containing every contract, timeline and vendor contact. I am happy, I said, and meant it completely. Tomorrow is going to be He kissed the top of my head in a gesture that felt tender and appreciative. It's going to be perfect because of you. I know I don't say it enough, but you're incredible at this. Daniel and Jessica have no idea how lucky they are. Saturday morning dawned exactly as the weather forecast had predicted, partly cloudy with gentle ocean breezes and perfect temperature. I woke up feeling energized and optimistic, ready to see 8 months of planning come to fruition. Michael was unusually cheerful as we got ready, humming while he shaved and commenting on how beautiful the day was going to be. He seemed genuinely excited about the wedding in a way that felt different from his usual focus on family recognition. For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly partners again, working together to create something meaningful. I have a good feeling about today, he said, as we drove toward Ocean View Manor for the final vendor coordination meetings. Everything's going to go perfectly, and everyone's going to have an amazing time. I smiled, watching the coastal scenery pass by our car window. I think you're right, this is going to be a day that Daniel and Jessica remember for the rest of their lives. What I didn't know was that Michael's good mood had nothing to do with his brother's happiness, or the beautiful wedding we had created together. His excitement came from anticipating a reunion that would destroy our marriage and humiliate me in front of everyone who mattered to both of us. The perfect day I had planned was about to become the stage for the most devastating betrayal I could have imagined, and I was walking into it completely blind, trusting in the partnership I thought we had rebuilt, and the love I believed we still shared. The calm was ending, the storm was about to begin. Saturday morning started exactly as planned. I arrived at Ocean View Manor at 7:30 a.m. to oversee vendor setup while Michael stayed home to handle what he called some last-minute business calls. The florists were punctual, the caterers were professional, and the venue looked absolutely magical as the morning sun filtered through the ancient oak trees, where Daniel and Jessica would say their vows in just 8 hours. I was feeling that particular satisfaction that comes from seeing months of planning executed flawlessly when my phone buzzed with a text message. Assuming it was Michael with some update about his arrival time, I glanced at the screen while directing the placement of the ceremony arch. The message wasn't from Michael, it was from an unknown number. "Hey gorgeous, can't wait to see you at the wedding today. It's been too long, Mias S." I stared at the phone, confused. The message was clearly meant for someone else, probably a wedding guest texting a friend or family member. I was about to delete it when another message arrived from the same number. "Michael said you're staying at the Marriott downtown. Room 412? I might have to make a late-night visit." My blood turned to ice. I read the message 3 times, trying to find some innocent explanation, but there was no mistaking what I was seeing. Someone named S was planning to visit Michael in a hotel room. On the night of his brother's wedding, the wedding I had funded and planned. With trembling hands I scrolled up to see if there were earlier messages from this number. There weren't. This was the beginning of a new conversation thread. But the casual tone, the mention of "it's been too long," the intimate emoji, this wasn't a business contact or a casual acquaintance. My first instinct was denial. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was a vendor texting the wrong number. Maybe it was someone confused about hotel arrangements for out-of-town guests. Maybe Michael had given someone his number for wedding coordination, and there was some misunderstanding. I called Michael immediately, my heart pounding as I watched Maria Santos arrange white hydrangeas into cascading perfection just 10 feet away. "Hey babe," he answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cheerful and casual. "How's everything looking?" "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just received some strange text messages that I think were meant for you. Someone texting about seeing you at the wedding and mentioning a hotel room." The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "Oh," he said, and I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. That's probably just someone confused about the guest accommodations. You know how it is with out-of-town guests and hotel mix-ups." But his voice had changed. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something careful and measured. He was lying, and we both knew I could hear it. "Michael, the message mentioned room 412 at the Marriott downtown. Do we have guests staying there?" I'm not sure. I can check the guest list when I get to the venue." "Don't worry about it, Victoria. You've got enough to manage without getting involved in hotel confusion." Don't worry about it. As if mysterious romantic text messages about hotel room visits were just minor logistical details I shouldn't concern myself with. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the venue I had spent 8 months perfecting, watching vendors transform the space into something magical, and felt my world tilt on its axis. Everything looked exactly as it should. The flowers were gorgeous, the lighting was perfect, the tables were elegant, but suddenly it all felt like a stage set for my own humiliation. I forced myself to focus on vendor coordination for the next hour, checking off items on my timeline and solving small logistical issues, but my mind kept returning to those text messages, and Michael's unconvincing response. Who was S? How long had it been since they'd seen each other? And why was this person planning a hotel room visit on the night of our family celebration? At 10:30 a.m., while reviewing the ceremony timeline with the string quartet, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "Just landed at SFO. So excited to see you after all these years. This wedding is the perfect excuse for us to finally reconnect." The heart emoji felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a confused guest or a business contact. This was someone who had traveled to California specifically for this wedding, someone who saw Daniel and Jessica's celebration as an excuse to reconnect with my husband. I excused myself from the vendor meeting and walked to a quiet corner of the garden, my hands shaking as I stared at the phone. The messages painted a clear picture. Michael had arranged for someone from his past to attend the wedding, someone he was planning to see in a hotel room, someone who used heart emojis and called him gorgeous. 24 hours earlier I would have called Michael immediately and demanded an explanation, but something about his dismissive response to my first call made me hesitate. If he was willing to lie so easily about hotel confusion, what else was he lying about? Instead of calling, I found myself Googling the phone number. It came back as registered to someone in Seattle, Washington. The area code was 206, which I recognized because Michael had lived in Seattle during his college years at the University of Washington. Seattle, college years. Someone who hadn't seen Michael in years but felt comfortable enough to use romantic language and plan hotel room visits. The pieces were falling into place in a way that made me feel physically sick. This was someone from Michael's past, probably from his university days, someone who had been important enough to stay in touch with occasionally, but distant enough that years had passed since their last meeting, someone who was using the wedding as cover for a reunion. As I stood in the garden, surrounded by the beauty I had created but suddenly feeling like an outsider at my own family event, a memory surfaced. Michael's college girlfriend, the one he'd dated for 4 years, the one he'd almost proposed to before they broke up during senior year when she got a job offer in Seattle. Her name was Sophia. Sophia Richardson. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit me. The mysterious text messages weren't from some random person or confused guest. They were from Sophia Richardson, the woman Michael had loved before me, the one who had broken his heart by choosing her career over their relationship 15 years ago. And now she was flying to California for Daniel's wedding, planning hotel room visits, and talking about finally reconnecting with my husband. Standing in the garden of Ocean View Manor, watching vendors put finishing touches on the wedding I had funded and planned, I understood with devastating clarity what was happening. Michael hadn't just taken credit for my generosity and my work. He had used this wedding, this celebration I had sacrificed for, as an opportunity to reconnect with the woman he'd never gotten over. The romantic dinners this week, the flowers, the sweet words about gratitude and partnership, none of it had been about rebuilding our marriage. It had been guilt, or worse, it had been manipulation designed to keep me calm and unsuspicious while he arranged his reunion with Sophia. Every vendor confirmation I had managed, every timeline I had perfected, every detail I had obsessed over, had been creating the perfect setting for my husband's affair. The wedding I thought was a celebration of love and commitment was actually going to be the stage for the destruction of my own marriage. The discovery was complete, the betrayal was clear, and I had 4 hours until the ceremony began to decide what I was going to do about it. The storm had arrived, and I was standing right in the center of it. Standing in the corner of the garden, my hands still trembling from the shock of discovering Sophia's texts, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Michael immediately, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. If he was capable of using our family celebration as cover for an affair, I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. I opened my laptop and accessed our shared phone account online. As the primary account holder, I had access to detailed records for both our phones. What I found in Michael's call and text logs from the past 3 months made me feel physically sick. The calls to Seattle had started in March, just 2 weeks after he'd promised to pay for Daniel's wedding. The pattern was unmistakable. Every Tuesday evening at 9 p.m., a 45-minute call to the same Seattle number. Every Friday afternoon, a shorter call during his lunch break. The frequency had increased dramatically in the past month, with some weeks showing daily conversations. But it wasn't just the frequency that devastated me, it was the timing. March 15th, first call to Sophia, 2 days after our fight about the wedding budget. March 22nd, hour-long call to Sophia, the same night I'd agreed to loan him the $90,000. April 3rd, call to Sophia immediately after I'd sent Daniel and Jessica the first vendor contracts. April 18th, call to Sophia, on the evening I'd worked until midnight coordinating the floral arrangements. Every major milestone in my wedding planning work had been followed by a phone call to his ex-girlfriend. While I was sacrificing my time, my money and my business opportunities to make his promise a reality, he was sharing those victories with another woman. My next discovery came when I checked our credit card statements online. There, buried among the wedding vendor payments I recognized, was a charge I'd never seen before. Marriott downtown San Francisco, 1 night premium suite, booked 3 weeks ago, room 412, the same room number Sophia had mentioned in her text. Michael had planned this reunion weeks in advance, timing it perfectly with the wedding celebration. While I was managing final vendor confirmations and handling last-minute logistics, He was arranging accommodations for his affair. The premium suite cost $400 for one night, money that came from our joint account, funded in part by my consulting income. I was paying for my husband's hotel room rendezvous with his ex-girlfriend. Driven by a need to understand who I was really married to, I did something I'd never done before. I investigated my husband's social media activity. Michael wasn't particularly active on Instagram or Facebook, but his LinkedIn profile told a different story. His professional network included dozens of connections from his University of Washington days, and buried among them was Sophia Richardson, listed as a senior marketing director at a tech company in Seattle. Her profile photo showed a stunning redhead with the kind of confident smile that suggested success and sophistication. But what made my blood run cold was discovering that Michael had been liking and commenting on her professional posts for months, congratulating her on promotions, praising her marketing insights, engaging with her content in ways that seemed supportive and admiring rather than casually professional. Brilliant strategy as always, Sophia. Some things never change. You were always the smartest person in the room. Congratulations on the promotion. Well deserved. Would love to catch up sometime. This campaign reminds me of that project we worked on senior year. You always had the best ideas. The comments painted a picture of someone who had maintained an emotional connection across 15 years and 3,000 miles. This wasn't a sudden reconnection. It was the continuation of a relationship that had never really ended. As I pieced together the evidence, a horrifying timeline emerged. Michael's reconnection with Sophia hadn't been spontaneous or accidental. It had been deliberately timed to coincide with the wedding planning process. The pattern was clear. As I took on more responsibility for creating Daniel and Jessica's perfect day, Michael had been using that freedom to rebuild his relationship with his first love. Every hour I spent on vendor calls, he'd been available for personal conversations with Sophia. Every evening I worked late coordinating wedding details, he'd been free to reminisce about college memories and plan their reunion. The wedding I thought was bringing our family together was actually providing the perfect cover for Michael to betray our marriage. My generosity had been his opportunity. My sacrifice had been his freedom. My final devastating discovery came when I cross-referenced the official wedding guest list with Sophia's travel plans. Her name wasn't on any list I'd seen. When I checked with Daniel and Jessica, they had no idea who Sophia Richardson was, or why she might be attending their wedding. Michael had invited his ex-girlfriend to his brother's wedding without telling anyone, not his family, not the bride and groom, and certainly not his wife, who was planning and funding the entire event. Sophia was coming as his personal guest, someone he'd added to the celebration for his own purposes. The audacity was breathtaking. He had used my money to create a beautiful setting, my planning to ensure everything would be perfect, and my trust to provide cover for bringing another woman to our family celebration. The wedding reception I'd designed would become the stage for him to publicly parade his affair in front of everyone we knew. Sitting in my car in the Ocean View Manor parking lot, surrounded by vendor trucks and wedding preparation activity, I tried to process the full scope of what Michael had done. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a sudden temptation. This was a calculated, months-long deception that had used my love for his family against me. He had manipulated my affection for Daniel and Jessica to secure funding for a wedding that would serve his personal agenda. He had exploited my desire to support our marriage during a difficult time to create space for rebuilding his relationship with another woman. He had taken advantage of my trust and generosity to arrange the most humiliating betrayal imaginable. But perhaps most devastating was the realization that everything I'd interpreted as renewed appreciation for our marriage, the romantic dinners, the flowers, the sweet words about partnership, had been guilt management. Or worse, they'd been tactical moves designed to keep me compliant and unsuspicious while he finalized his reunion plans. The man I'd been married to for 12 years, the man I'd sacrificed my business savings to support, the man I'd worked endless hours to help succeed, had been planning to humiliate me at his brother's wedding since the day I'd agreed to fund it. As I sat in that parking lot, watching vendors transform Ocean View Manor into the magical setting I'd envisioned, I faced a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could confront Michael privately and try to salvage some dignity from the situation. I could quietly endure the wedding and deal with our marriage problems afterward. I could pretend I didn't know what was happening and hope that somehow the reunion with Sophia wouldn't destroy everything we'd built together. Or I could ensure that Michael's betrayal had consequences that matched its scope. The wedding was starting in 3 hours. Sophia was already in California, probably preparing to see the man she'd never stopped loving. Michael was likely getting ready to enjoy his perfect plan, a beautiful wedding to showcase his generosity, funded entirely by his wife's sacrifice, providing the ideal setting for his affair. But he had made one critical error in his planning. He had underestimated the woman whose generosity he was exploiting, and he was about to discover that I had documented every detail of his deception, just as thoroughly as I had documented every aspect of the wedding he was about to use against me. The depth of the betrayal was clear. The decision was made, and Michael Sullivan was about to learn that there are consequences for using someone's love as a weapon against them. Despite discovering the devastating scope of Michael's betrayal, some part of me still hoped there might be an explanation that could salvage our marriage. 12 years of shared history, the romantic week we'd just had, the partnership we'd built together. Surely there was some misunderstanding that could explain away the evidence I'd uncovered. I drove home from Ocean View Manor in a strange state of determined calm. The wedding vendors had everything under control, the ceremony was still 3 hours away, and I had a small window of time to give Michael one last chance to tell me the truth. If he could explain the phone calls, the hotel reservation, and Sophia's travel plans in a way that made sense, maybe we could work through this crisis together. I found him in our bedroom, getting dressed in the navy suit I'd helped him select for the wedding. He was humming softly while adjusting his cufflinks, the same gold ones his father had worn to his own wedding. For a moment, seeing him preparing for his brother's celebration, I almost convinced myself that I'd misinterpreted the evidence. This was the man I'd loved for over a decade. Surely he couldn't be capable of such calculated deception. "Michael," I said, closing the bedroom door behind me, "we need to talk." He looked up from the mirror where he'd been adjusting his tie, and I saw something flicker across his face, concern perhaps, or recognition that this conversation was going to be different from our usual discussions about wedding logistics. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Did something go wrong with the vendors?" "The vendors are fine," I said, sitting on the edge of our bed. "Michael, I need you to be completely honest with me about something, and I need you to know that how you answer this question will determine what happens to our marriage." His hands paused on his tie. "Victoria, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I wanted to give him every opportunity to tell me the truth without revealing how much I already knew. "Who is Sophia Richardson, and why is she coming to Daniel's wedding?" The color drained from his face so quickly that I thought he might faint. For a moment, he just stood there, his mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process how I'd learned about Sophia's existence. Where did you hear that name?" "That's not an answer, Michael. Who is she?" I watched him mentally recalibrate, his expression shifting from shock to something more calculated. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same dismissive tone he'd used on the phone earlier. "Sophia's just an old college friend who heard about the wedding through mutual connections. I think she might be in town for business and wanted to stop by." "It's not a big deal, Victoria." "An old college friend," I repeated slowly. "Michael, I've been married to you for 12 years. I know about your college relationships. Sophia Richardson was your girlfriend for 4 years, the woman you almost proposed to." His jaw tightened, but he maintained his casual stance. "Okay, yes, we dated in college, but that was 15 years ago. We're completely different people now. She's just a friend who wanted to attend a family celebration. A friend you've been calling twice a week for the past 3 months." This time, his composure cracked completely. "How do you know about?" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "Victoria, I can explain this." "Then explain it," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Explain why you've been having hour-long conversations with your ex-girlfriend every week since you promised to pay for Daniel's wedding. Explain why she's staying in a hotel room you booked and paid for."
T. She's saying. 2.
Explain why you invited her to your brother's wedding without telling me, or Daniel, or anyone else in your family. Michael's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. When he finally spoke, his words came out in a rush of defensive justification. Look, Sophia reached out when she heard about my business difficulties. She works in marketing, and she's been giving me advice about how to rebuild my client base. The phone calls are about business strategy, nothing more,
Business strategy.
I said flatly.
Yes.
And when she heard about the wedding, she offered to attend as a networking opportunity. She knows people in the Bay Area who might be interested in my services. The hotel room, I thought it would be professional to ensure she had proper accommodations, since she's doing me a favor by attending. Every word felt like another betrayal. He was lying so smoothly, so convincingly, that I could see how easily I might have believed him if I hadn't seen the evidence myself. Victoria, he continued, stepping closer and reaching for my hands. I should have told you about the calls, but I didn't want you to worry. You've been under so much stress with the wedding planning, and my business problems have been hard enough on both of us. I was just trying to handle things quietly. His tone had shifted to something pleading and apologetic, designed to make me feel guilty for questioning him. And honestly, he added, I'm a little hurt that you don't trust me. After everything we've built together, after how hard I've been working to make this wedding perfect for Daniel and Jessica, I thought you knew me better than to think I'd ever do anything to jeopardize our marriage. The audacity was breathtaking. He was using my own wedding planning work as evidence of his commitment to our family, when that same work had provided the perfect cover for his affair planning. Michael, I said, pulling my hands away from his, she sent text messages to your phone by mistake, messages that mentioned hotel room visits, and finally reconnecting after all these years. That doesn't sound like business networking. His expression shifted again, this time to something resembling wounded confusion. What text messages? Victoria, I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe someone's playing a prank, or maybe you misunderstood something you saw, but I swear to you, there's nothing inappropriate happening here. He was looking directly into my eyes as he lied, his voice carrying the perfect note of sincerity and bewilderment. If I hadn't seen the evidence myself, if I hadn't traced the phone records and found the hotel reservation, I might have believed him. You're saying you don't know anything about text messages from Sophia, about visiting room 412 at the Marriott. Room 412. Victoria, I honestly don't know what you're talking about. Maybe someone's trying to cause problems between us. Maybe Sophia's phone was hacked, or maybe this is some kind of misunderstanding. Michael sat down beside me on the bed, his voice becoming soft and concerned. Sweetheart, I think the stress of planning this wedding has been harder on you than we realized. You've been working 18-hour days, managing hundreds of details, dealing with the pressure of making everything perfect. Is it possible that you're seeing threats where none exist? He was suggesting that I was having some kind of stress-induced breakdown, that the evidence I'd uncovered was the product of an overworked mind rather than his calculated deception. Michael, I said quietly, I have phone records showing months of calls to Sophia. I have credit card records showing you paid for her hotel room. I have screenshots of your LinkedIn interactions with her going back months. This isn't stress or imagination. For a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was replaced by hurt confusion. I don't know what to say, Victoria. If you've already decided I'm guilty of something, if you've been investigating me like I'm some kind of criminal, then maybe we have bigger problems in our marriage than I realized. He was turning this around on me, making my discovery of his betrayal into evidence of my own failings as a wife. As I sat there listening to Michael manipulate and gaslight me with such practiced ease, I realized that the man I'd been married to for 12 years was a stranger. The evidence was overwhelming, but he was prepared to lie to my face rather than admit what he'd done. He was willing to suggest I was mentally unstable rather than take responsibility for his actions. The confrontation had failed completely. Not only was Michael refusing to acknowledge his betrayal, but he was actively manipulating me into questioning my own sanity and judgment. In that moment, I understood that there would be no private resolution to this crisis, no heartfelt conversation that would lead to reconciliation, but no way to salvage our marriage through honest communication. Michael had made his choice. He was going to parade his affair at the wedding I had funded and planned, and he was prepared to destroy me psychologically to protect his secret. But he had underestimated one crucial factor. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman with documentation, evidence, and a very public platform waiting for me in just 2 hours. The private confrontation was over. The public reckoning was about to begin. After Michael left for the venue, claiming he needed to help Daniel with last-minute groomsmen coordination, I sat in our bedroom feeling numb from the gaslighting I'd just experienced. But my numbness quickly turned to determination. If he was going to lie so blatantly to my face, I needed irrefutable proof of what he was planning. I decided to arrive at Ocean View Manor separately, giving myself time to observe Michael's behavior without him knowing I was watching. As I drove toward the venue, my phone rang with an unknown number. My heart pounded as I answered, wondering if this would be another misdirected message from Sophia. "Hello?"
I said cautiously.
"Oh, I'm so sorry," came a woman's voice with a slight southern accent. "I think I've been texting the wrong number all morning. I was trying to reach Michael Sullivan about wedding arrangements."
It was her.
Sophia Richardson was calling my phone, apparently still confused about our numbers. "This is Victoria Chen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt.
Michael's wife.
The silence that followed was deafening. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Victoria. I had no idea Michael was still, I thought, he told me." "He told you what, Sophia?" What came out of Sophia's mouth in the next 5 minutes destroyed any remaining hope I had for my marriage. "Victoria, I am so sorry. Michael told me you two were separated. He said you'd been living apart for months, and that the divorce was just waiting for the wedding to be over, so it wouldn't disrupt Daniel's celebration." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He told you we were getting divorced?"
Yes.
She said, her voice breaking. "He said you'd both agreed it was over but wanted to keep up appearances for the family until after the wedding. He said you were only staying in the same house for logistical reasons, and that you'd been sleeping in separate rooms since January." Each word felt like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just been planning an affair, he'd been planning to replace me entirely, and he'd used our family celebration as the perfect cover story for introducing his new relationship to everyone we knew. "Sophia," I said, pulling over to the side of the road because my hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. "We are not separated. We are not getting divorced. I've been sleeping in our bed next to him every night. I've been planning and paying for this entire wedding. Until this morning, I thought we were happily married." The sound that came from her was part gasp, part sob. "Oh God, Victoria, I would never, I had no idea. He's been calling me for months, telling me how lonely he was, how the marriage had been over for years, but you wouldn't discuss divorce until after the wedding. He said you were just friends now, co-parenting the wedding planning but living completely separate lives." As Sophia continued talking, the full scope of Michael's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just lied to me about the nature of their relationship, he'd constructed an elaborate false narrative for Sophia that painted me as an estranged wife, who was essentially a roommate and business partner rather than a loving spouse. "He told me about the wedding funding," Sophia continued, clearly struggling to process what she'd learned. "But he said it was part of your divorce settlement, that you'd agreed to pay for the wedding as part of dividing your assets, and that this was your way of contributing to his family before you both moved on with your lives." Even my generosity had been reframed as a cold business transaction, rather than an act of love and sacrifice. "Sophia," I said, "did he invite you to the wedding as his date?" "Not exactly," she said quietly. "He said you'd both agreed it would be appropriate for him to bring a companion since you were essentially separated, but that he wanted to be discreet out of respect for the family. He said after the wedding, when the divorce was finalized, we could be more open about our relationship." The most devastating part of Sophia's confession was learning about Michael's long-term strategy. This wasn't just about a weekend affair, or a moment of weakness. He had been systematically planning to transition from our marriage to a relationship with Sophia, using Daniel's wedding as the bridge between his old life and his new one. He said the wedding would be the perfect opportunity for me to meet his family naturally, Sophia explained. That after I attended as his friend, people would get used to seeing us together, and when the divorce was announced in a few months, it wouldn't be shocking that we'd started dating. Michael had orchestrated the entire evening as a soft launch for his new relationship. The wedding I'd funded and planned was intended to be his coming-out party with his ex-girlfriend, presented under the cover story that I was a soon-to-be ex-wife, who had graciously agreed to help with family logistics during our amicable separation. "Sophia," I said, "what did he tell you about tonight? About after the wedding?" Her voice became very small. "He said you'd arranged to stay somewhere else, so we could have privacy to talk about our future, that you'd been very understanding about giving us space to reconnect." The hotel room. He'd told her I was staying elsewhere, while they spent the night together in the premium suite I'd unknowingly paid for. "Sophia," I said, my voice becoming stronger as anger replaced devastation, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Michael has lied to both of us. I am not separated from my husband. We are not getting divorced. I have spent the last 8 months of my life working 18-hour days to plan and fund this wedding, because I love his family, and wanted to support his promise to his brother." "I believe you," she whispered. "God, I believe you. The way he talked about you, it never quite made sense. He seemed to know too much about your daily life for someone who was supposedly living separately, and when I asked to meet you during the planning process, he always had excuses for why it wouldn't be appropriate yet." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going home," she said immediately. "I'm getting back on a plane today. I never would have come if I'd known the truth. Victoria, I am so sorry. I thought I was helping a lonely man move on from a failed marriage. I had no idea I was being used to destroy a happy one." Before Sophia hung up, she gave me one final piece of information that confirmed everything I'd suspected about Michael's character. "Victoria, there's something else you should know. Michael didn't just tell me you were separated. He told me you'd been having an affair with one of your consulting clients, and that's why the marriage ended. He said you'd become cold and distant, that you cared more about your career than your family, and that you'd already moved on emotionally even though you hadn't moved out physically." So not only had Michael constructed a false narrative about our separation, he'd painted me as the villain in our marriage's supposed demise. He'd made me the unfaithful spouse, the career-obsessed wife, who'd abandoned her family for professional success. He said, "The only reason you were helping with the wedding was guilt."
Sophia continued.
"That you felt bad about how things ended and wanted to do one nice thing for his family before you both started over. Every generous act, every hour of work, every sacrifice I'd made had been reframed as guilt-driven penance rather than love-driven generosity." After Sophia hung up, promising to catch the next flight back to Seattle and never contact Michael again, I sat in my car processing the full magnitude of what I'd learned. Michael hadn't just been planning an affair, he'd been planning a complete replacement of our life together, using my work and my money to create the perfect setting for introducing his new relationship to our families and friends. The wedding I'd created was supposed to be his transition event, the last public appearance of our marriage, and the first public appearance of his relationship with Sophia. The reception I'd planned was intended to be our farewell party, though only Michael would know that was what was happening. But most importantly, I now had a witness. Sophia Richardson could testify to the months of lies Michael had told, the false narrative he'd constructed, and the deliberate deception he'd used to manipulate both of us. If I chose to expose him publicly, I wouldn't be a bitter wife making unsubstantiated accusations. I would be a woman with documentation, evidence, and a victim of his lies willing to confirm the truth. The confirmation was complete. There was no innocent explanation, no misunderstanding, no way to salvage our marriage through private conversation. Michael Sullivan had planned to humiliate me at the wedding I'd funded and worked to create, and he'd been willing to lie to everyone, including the woman he claimed to love, to make it happen. But he'd made one crucial error. He'd underestimated my ability to uncover the truth, and my willingness to ensure that actions had consequences. The wedding was starting in 90 minutes, and Michael Sullivan was about to discover that there are some betrayals that demand public justice. Sitting in my car on the side of the road, I faced the most important decision of my life. I could drive home, pack my bags, and quietly file for divorce on Monday morning. I could endure the wedding ceremony, maintain my dignity, and handle this betrayal privately, or I could ensure that Michael faced the consequences of his actions in front of everyone who had praised his generosity and character. The safe choice was obvious. Take the high road, protect Daniel and Jessica's special day, avoid creating a scene that would dominate family conversations for years to come. That's what the old Victoria would have done. The Victoria who had spent 8 months working in the shadows, accepting invisible contributions, swallowing her need for recognition in favor of family harmony. But the old Victoria had been married to a man she thought she knew. The old Victoria had trusted that her sacrifices were building something meaningful with a partner who valued her contribution. The old Victoria had believed that marriage meant mutual respect and honest communication. That Victoria was gone. As I drove toward Ocean View Manor, I found myself analyzing this situation with the same strategic thinking I applied to my most complex consulting projects. Michael had made calculated decisions designed to maximize his benefit while minimizing his risk. He'd used my love for his family to secure funding, my trust to provide cover for his deception, and my generosity to create the perfect setting for his betrayal. Every element of his plan had been designed to ensure that I would discover his affair, only after it was too late to do anything about it. By the time I realized what was happening, the wedding would be over, Sophia would be established in his life, and I would be faced with the choice of either accepting the situation quietly, or becoming the bitter ex-wife, who couldn't handle his happiness. But Michael had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed I would prioritize avoiding embarrassment over demanding justice. He'd counted on my desire to protect family relationships to keep me silent about his deception. He'd expected me to absorb the humiliation privately, rather than expose his lies publicly. He was wrong. What Michael didn't understand was that I now held every advantage in this situation. I had documentation of his deception, testimony from his victim, and evidence of his manipulation that was irrefutable. More importantly, I had the one thing he couldn't control: the truth. The wedding reception he'd planned to use as his coming-out party would instead become his public reckoning. The family gathering he'd intended to manipulate would become his trial. The celebration I'd funded and planned would become the stage for his downfall. And most crucially, I would be in control of the timing, the setting, and the narrative. As I pulled into the Ocean View Manor parking lot, I saw Michael's car already there, along with the cars of family members who had arrived early for photos. Through the venue windows, I could see him laughing with his groomsmen, completely confident that his plan was proceeding flawlessly. He had no idea that Sophia was already on her way back to Seattle. He didn't know that his months of lies had been exposed. He was probably checking his phone periodically, wondering why his college girlfriend hadn't responded to his recent messages, but assuming she was just busy with travel logistics. In 60 minutes, Daniel and Jessica would walk down the aisle, I decorated with flowers I'd selected, surrounded by family and friends, who believed they were celebrating not just the bride and groom, but also the generosity of the brother who had made it all possible. In 90 minutes, those same family and friends would be seated for dinner, listening to speeches about love, commitment, and family values, while Michael basked in gratitude for his incredible sacrifice. And then, at the perfect moment when everyone was focused on celebrating the Sullivan family's generosity and love, I would take the microphone and tell them exactly who had really made this celebration possible, and what Michael had planned to do with my gift. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and smoothed my dress. I looked calm, composed, and elegantly dressed for a family celebration. No one looking at me would suspect that I was carrying evidence that would destroy my marriage and expose one of their family members as a manipulative liar. But that's exactly what I was about to do. Michael Sullivan had used my love as a weapon against me. He'd exploited my generosity to fund his betrayal. He'd manipulated my trust to create the perfect setting for his humiliation of our marriage. Tonight, he would learn that there are consequences for such betrayals, and everyone who had praised his character would discover exactly what kind of man they'd been celebrating. The strategic decision was made. Justice would be served publicly, with documentation, witnesses, and irrefutable evidence. And it would happen at the reception I had created, in front of the family I had sacrificed for, using the microphone that was supposed to celebrate his generosity. Michael thought he was walking into his perfect evening. He had no idea he was walking into his reckoning. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, organizing the digital evidence I would need for my public revelation. Every screenshot, every phone record, every credit card statement was meticulously cataloged on my phone. But I knew that in the heat of the moment, I needed something more concrete, more dramatic than numbers on a screen. I called Rebecca Martinez, the venue coordinator, and explained that I needed access to the sound system for a special surprise announcement during the reception. As the person who had coordinated all vendor relationships, she was more than happy to accommodate what she assumed was another thoughtful touch I'd planned for Daniel and Jessica. "Of course, Mrs. Chen," she said warmly. "Your attention to detail has made this one of our most beautiful weddings. What time would you like to make your announcement?" "During the dinner speeches," I replied. "After Michael speaks but before the father of the bride toast, I'll let you know when." As I walked toward the venue, I practiced my opening lines. I couldn't afford to be emotional or vindictive. My credibility would depend on presenting facts calmly and letting the evidence speak for itself. Michael's manipulation had been calculated and strategic. My response needed to be equally composed. I rehearsed the key points: the $90,000 loan from my business account, the months of planning work I'd done alone, the phone record showing Michael's affair, and most importantly, Sophia's testimony about his lies. Each fact would be presented simply and clearly, without dramatic flair or emotional appeals. The goal wasn't to destroy Michael out of spite, it was to ensure that everyone who had been deceived understood the truth about what had really happened over the past 8 months. Inside the venue, I found Maria Santos putting finishing touches on the centerpieces. The flowers looked absolutely perfect, exactly as I'd envisioned them months ago, when I was still believing in the partnership I thought Michael and I shared. "Victoria," she called out, beaming with pride, "everything looks magical. You should be so proud of what you've created here." "Thank you, Maria," I said, and meant it. Whatever happened tonight, I had created something beautiful. Daniel and Jessica would have memories of a perfect wedding day, even if they would also remember it as the day they learned who their brother really was. I checked with James Chen, the photographer, to ensure he would be positioned to capture the reception speeches. I wanted documentation of this moment, both for my own records and because I suspected Michael's reaction would be worth preserving. Guests began arriving for the ceremony, and I took my assigned seat in the third row. Not the front row where the mother of the groom should sit, not beside the family that had benefited from my generosity, but in a spot that would give me a clear view of Michael's face during the proceedings. He looked confident and happy as he escorted his mother to her seat. Patricia was glowing with pride, whispering to nearby relatives about how grateful she was for her generous older son. Robert shook hands with guests, clearly enjoying his role as father of the successful brother who had saved the day. Michael caught my eye once during the pre-ceremony mingling and gave me a warm smile, the same smile he'd been using to manipulate me for months. He had no idea that I knew about his phone calls, his hotel reservation, or his elaborate lies to Sophia. He thought his plan was proceeding perfectly. As Daniel and Jessica exchanged vows under the flower arch I had designed, I found myself genuinely moved by their happiness. Their love was real, their joy was authentic, and their celebration was unmarred by the deception that surrounded its funding. Whatever damage my revelation would cause, it wouldn't touch the core of what we were celebrating. I watched Michael during the ceremony, noting how he positioned himself prominently in the wedding party photos, how he made sure to be visible during key moments. He was already crafting the narrative of his generosity, ensuring that the visual record would support his version of events. But I was creating a different kind of record. In 90 minutes, when everyone was gathered for dinner, and the speeches began, I would present the real story of this wedding. And unlike Michael's version, mine would be supported by documentation, witnesses, and irrefutable evidence. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the cocktail hour, I excused myself to make final preparation. I sent a text to Sophia, asking her to keep her phone available in case I needed her to speak to Michael's family directly. She responded immediately, promising to answer any call and confirm everything she had told me about Michael's lies. I also forwarded copies of all my evidence to my personal email account, ensuring that even if something happened to my phone, I would still have access to the documentation I needed. The reception was beginning. In 1 hour, Michael would stand before 200 guests and accept praise for generosity that wasn't his. He would bask in gratitude for sacrifices he hadn't made, and take credit for work he hadn't done. And then I would take the microphone and tell everyone the truth. The preparation was complete. The evidence was organized. The witnesses were available. Michael Sullivan's reckoning was about to begin. The cocktail hour unfolded exactly as I had planned it 8 months earlier. Guests mingled on the terrace overlooking the Pacific, sipping signature cocktails I had designed with the bartender to complement the coastal setting. The string quartet played classical pieces I had specifically requested, and the late afternoon light filtered through the ancient oaks in exactly the magical way I had envisioned. From my position near the garden entrance, I watched Michael work the crowd with practiced charm. He moved from group to group, accepting congratulations for his incredible generosity, modestly deflecting praise while clearly enjoying every moment of recognition. I counted at least 6 different conversations where he explained how he'd made sacrifices to ensure Daniel could have the wedding of his dreams. Family comes first. I heard him tell a group of his father's construction colleagues, "When your brother needs you, you find a way to make it happen." Each word felt like a knife twist, but I remained calm and observant. This was exactly the kind of behavior I needed to document. Michael taking full credit for sacrifices he hadn't made, basking in praise for generosity that wasn't his. As guests moved into the reception hall for dinner, I made my way to table 23, the vendor coordination table in the far corner where Michael had seated me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had planned and funded the entire wedding was seated with the hired help, while an empty chair at the head table waited for a mistress who was no longer coming. From my distant table, I watched Michael's growing confusion as he repeatedly checked his phone. Sophia should have arrived by now, should have responded to his messages, should have been there to begin their public debut as a couple. I could see him making excuses to other family members, probably explaining that his business associate had been delayed by travel issues. The empty chair beside him became more conspicuous as dinner was served. Patricia kept glancing at it, clearly wondering why Michael had requested an extra place setting. Robert asked loud enough for nearby tables to hear whether Michael's friend from Seattle was still planning to attend. Michael's confident facade was beginning to crack, replaced by barely concealed anxiety about his missing accomplice. As Rebecca Martinez began organizing the evening's speeches, I confirmed my position in the lineup. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Daniel would speak first, thanking everyone for attending. Jessica would follow with gratitude to both families. Michael would then give his speech about family sacrifice and brotherly love, the moment he'd been building toward for months. And then, before the emotional high of his speech could fade, before guests could fully absorb his narrative of generous brotherhood, I would stand up and request a moment to add to his remarks. Rebecca had positioned the wireless microphone exactly where I'd requested, easily accessible from any table in the room. The sound system was tested and ready. James Chen, the photographer, would be in perfect position to capture reactions from both the head table and the crowd. Everything was in place for Michael's public reckoning. As dinner was served, I sent 2 final text messages that would seal Michael's fate. The first was to Sophia in Seattle. "If Michael tries to contact you tonight, please don't respond. Everything will be clear soon." The second was to my divorce attorney, Brian Walsh, whom I'd contacted during the cocktail hour. "Please prepare emergency divorce paperwork for Monday filing. Adultery documented with evidence. We'll call you tomorrow with details." Having a lawyer ready to move quickly on Monday would prevent Michael from attempting to control the narrative or manipulate the legal proceedings. By the time he realized what was happening, the documentation of his betrayal would already be in the hands of legal professionals. Throughout dinner, I maintained perfect composure. When family members approached my table to thank me for helping Michael with all the wedding details, I smiled graciously and deflected credit back to Michael. When Patricia hugged me and whispered how proud she was of the team Michael and I made, I simply nodded and said he would be speaking about that very soon. Every interaction reinforced the narrative that Michael had built, making his eventual downfall even more dramatic. The higher he climbed on the pedestal of family admiration, the farther he would fall when the truth came out. I could see him watching me occasionally from the head table, probably wondering why I seemed so calm and collected, despite the obvious tension of the morning's confrontation. He was likely attributing my composure to acceptance of his manipulation, perhaps even relief that our marriage problems would soon be resolved through his carefully orchestrated transition to Sophia. He had no idea that I was counting down the minutes until his public destruction. As dessert was served and Rebecca Martinez began clearing the head table for speeches, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. 8 months of invisible work, 3 months of unknowing manipulation, and 1 day of devastating discovery had led to this moment. In 15 minutes, Michael would stand before 200 guests and deliver the speech he'd been planning since the day he promised to pay for Daniel's wedding. He would accept credit for generosity that belonged to me, take praise for sacrifices he hadn't made, and position himself as the loving brother who had saved the day. And then I would stand up and tell everyone exactly who had really saved the day, and what Michael had planned to do with my gift. The setup was complete. Michael Sullivan was about to give the performance of his life, never knowing that it would also be his final bow. Rebecca Martinez approached the microphone with practiced grace, her voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to share this beautiful celebration with Daniel and Jessica Sullivan. We'll now hear from some very special people, beginning with our groom." Daniel stood up, radiant with happiness, and delivered a heartfelt speech about finding his soulmate and the importance of family support. His words were genuine and touching, speaking about how grateful he was for everyone who had made their dream wedding possible. Jessica followed, her voice trembling with emotion as she thanked both families for welcoming her and for the incredible generosity that had made this day perfect. She looked directly at Michael as she spoke about sacrifices and love, clearly believing every word of the narrative he had constructed. Then came the moment I had been waiting for 8 months. Michael rose from his chair with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to being celebrated. He adjusted his tie, the same gesture I'd watched him make before important business presentations, and smiled at the crowd with genuine warmth. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Daniel and Jessica," he began, his voice carrying the perfect tone of humble pride. "When my little brother came to me 8 months ago, worried that he couldn't afford the wedding Jessica deserved, I knew exactly what I had to do." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when the people you love need you most," Michael continued, gaining confidence with each word. "It's about making sacrifices so that the next generation can have what they dream of. It's about proving that love conquers all obstacles, including financial ones." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Every word he spoke was true, but he was describing my actions, not his own. "This wedding represents everything our family stands for," he said, gesturing toward the elaborate decorations I had selected, the flowers I had arranged, the venue I had chosen. "When you love someone, you find a way to make their dreams come true, no matter what it costs you personally." The applause was thunderous. Robert was beaming with pride at his successful son. Patricia was crying openly. Guests were nodding and smiling, clearly moved by this display of brotherly devotion and family values. Michael raised his champagne glass, preparing for his final flourish. "So here's to Daniel and Jessica, and to the power of family love to overcome any challenge." "Here's to—" "Excuse me," I said, standing up from table 23. The room fell silent so abruptly it was almost comical. Michael froze mid-toast, his champagne glass suspended in the air, his mouth still open from his interrupted sentence. Every head in the room turned toward me. 200 pairs of eyes focused on the woman in the corner who had just interrupted the emotional climax of the evening's speeches. Michael's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, concern, and finally barely suppressed panic. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, walking slowly toward the front of the room, "but I think there are some important details about this wedding that everyone should know before we toast to family values and sacrifices." Rebecca Martinez looked confused but handed me the microphone without question. After all, I was the one who had coordinated every aspect of this event. Michael remained frozen at his place, clearly trying to process what was happening and how to respond. His confident smile had completely disappeared, replaced by the look of a man who suddenly realized he might be in serious trouble. The room was so quiet that the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor seemed to echo like gunshots. I reached the front of the room, turned to face the crowd, and looked directly into Michael's terrified eyes. "Thank you, Michael, for that beautiful speech about family sacrifices," I said into the microphone, my voice calm and clear. "Now let me tell everyone about the sacrifices that actually made this wedding possible." I held up my phone, displaying the first bank transfer on the screen for everyone to see. 8 months ago, Michael promised to pay for Daniel and Jessica's wedding. What he didn't tell you is that he couldn't afford it. His business had lost 30% of its revenue, and he had no savings to cover wedding expenses. The murmurs started immediately. Michael's face had gone completely white, so he asked me to loan him the money. $90,000 from my business account, money I had saved for my own company's expansion. I swiped to the next screenshot. Here's the transfer, dated March 22nd. Every vendor payment, every deposit, every expense of this beautiful wedding came from my bank account. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Robert was staring at Michael with confusion and growing concern. "But that's not the worst part," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "For the past 8 months, while I planned every detail of this wedding, while I selected these flowers, coordinated with these vendors, designed this entire celebration, Michael has been telling someone else that our marriage was over." I pulled up the phone records on my screen. Michael has been having hour-long phone calls twice a week with his college ex-girlfriend, Sophia Richardson. He told her we were separated and getting divorced. He invited her to this wedding as his date, planning to use the celebration I funded as the debut of their relationship. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Guests began talking all at once, voices rising in disbelief and outrage. Daniel stood up from his chair, his face a mask of confusion and anger. Jessica looked like she might be sick. "That's not true," Michael finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "Victoria, you're the phone records," I interrupted, holding up my phone. 47 calls to Seattle in 3 months. "Here's the hotel reservation you made for room 412 at the Marriott, paid for with our joint credit card. The same room number Sophia mentioned in the text messages she accidentally sent to my phone this morning." I turned to address the crowd directly. "Sophia Richardson flew here from Seattle today, believing she was attending the wedding of her boyfriend, who was going through an amicable divorce. She had no idea that his supposedly estranged wife had been sleeping next to him every night and planning his brother's wedding with her own money." Patricia stood up from her chair, her face a mixture of shock and fury. "Michael, is this true? Did you lie to us about paying for the wedding?" Robert's voice boomed across the reception hall. "Son, did you take credit for your wife's money?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking with emotion. "Michael, tell me Victoria is lying. Tell me you didn't use our wedding as some kind of cover for cheating on your wife." Michael looked around the room desperately, searching for support that was nowhere to be found. Every face stared back at him with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to outright anger. "If anyone doubts what I'm saying," I announced, "I have Sophia Richardson on speed dial. She's currently at San Francisco Airport, waiting for her flight back to Seattle after I called her this afternoon and explained that Michael is still very much married to a wife who knew nothing about their relationship." I held up my phone. "Should I call her now so she can confirm to all of you exactly what Michael told her about our marriage and his plans for tonight?" The silence that followed was deafening. Michael slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands, finally understanding that his deception had been completely exposed. "The empty chair next to Michael tonight," I said, gesturing to the head table, "was reserved for the woman he planned to introduce as his new girlfriend at the wedding I planned and paid for. The same wedding where I was seated at the vendor table in the corner, like hired help rather than family." I set the microphone down on the head table and looked directly at Michael one final time. That's the real story of tonight's family sacrifices and values. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the celebration that I created for Daniel and Jessica, the two people who actually deserve to be celebrated tonight. The aftermath of my revelation was swift and devastating. Michael sat frozen in his chair as chaos erupted around him. Guests were pulling out their phones, taking pictures and videos of the scene. The photographers had captured everything, and I could already see people posting to social media. Patricia was the first to act. She marched over to Michael with a fury I'd never seen from the usually gentle woman. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you lie to this family and take credit for Victoria's generosity while planning to humiliate her at our celebration?" Robert was right behind her, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists. 12 years, Michael. Victoria has been part of this family for 12 years, and this is how you treat her? By using her money to fund your affair? Daniel's reaction was perhaps the most devastating. "You used our wedding," he said, his voice breaking. "You turned the happiest day of our lives into a cover story for cheating on your wife, the wife who made our dreams possible." Michael finally found his voice, but his words only made things worse. "It's not what it looks like," he said desperately. "Sophia and we weren't, we were just talking. Victoria is exaggerating everything." "Exaggerating," I said, still standing near the microphone. "Should I call Sophia right now so she can tell everyone about the lies you told her? About how you said we were divorced, and that I was having an affair?" "Don't," he said, quickly, panic clear in his voice. "Please don't do that." His plea for mercy only confirmed his guilt to everyone watching. The man who had been confidently accepting praise 20 minutes earlier was now begging his wife not to expose more of his lies. What surprised me most was how quickly Michael's entire family turned against him. Patricia walked over to me and took my hands in hers. "Victoria, I am so sorry. We had no idea. If we had known the truth, we never would have let him take credit for your incredible generosity." Robert nodded grimly. "From now on, everyone in this family knows who really made this wedding possible. And everyone will know what kind of man Michael really is." Daniel and Jessica approached together, both of them looking stricken. "Victoria," Daniel said, "we don't know how to thank you or how to apologize for what Michael did. This whole celebration exists because of you." Jessica was crying openly. "I can't believe he was going to bring another woman to our wedding, using our special day to parade his affair around. It's disgusting." Within minutes, videos of my speech were circulating on every social media platform. Guests had recorded everything, and the story was going viral in real time. #wedding revenge and #who really paid for everything were trending within the hour. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. People were calling me a hero for exposing Michael's manipulation. Marriage counselors were sharing the video as an example of financial abuse and gaslighting. Divorce attorneys were using it to illustrate documentation and evidence gathering. Michael's professional reputation was being destroyed as colleagues and clients saw the videos. His marketing agency's social media pages were flooded with comments about his character and business ethics. As I prepared to leave the reception, Michael made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. He stood up, his voice carrying across the still buzzing crowd. "Victoria, please, can we talk privately? This doesn't have to end our marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. After being exposed for months of lies, financial manipulation, and planned adultery, he was still trying to negotiate. "Our marriage ended the moment you started planning to replace me," I said clearly, making sure everyone could hear. "The only difference is that now everyone knows the truth about what kind of husband and brother you really are." I picked up my purse and walked toward the exit, my head held high. Behind me I could hear Michael's family continuing to berate him for his betrayal. Patricia called after me, "Victoria, you'll always be family to us, no matter what happens with Michael." The consequences were swift, severe, and exactly what Michael deserved. His lies had been exposed, his reputation was in ruins, and his family now knew who had really made their celebration possible. Justice had been served, publicly and completely. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Michael was forced to sell his marketing agency to pay me back the $90,000 plus damages for financial fraud and emotional distress. The prenup we'd signed protected my business assets, and his documented adultery meant he received nothing from our shared property. Sophia Richardson never spoke to Michael again after learning the truth. She sent me a heartfelt apology letter and testified during the divorce proceedings about Michael's systematic lies and manipulation. Her testimony was crucial in establishing his pattern of deception. The wedding video went viral with over 20 million views across social media platforms. I received thousands of messages from people who had experienced similar betrayals, thanking me for showing them that silence isn't the only option when facing manipulation and financial abuse. Most importantly, Daniel and Jessica's marriage thrived. They insisted on reimbursing me for the wedding costs, even though I told them it wasn't necessary. "You gave us the perfect start to our marriage," Daniel said, "and we want to make sure you get back what you invested in our happiness." The Sullivan family, minus Michael, remained close to me throughout the divorce. Patricia became like a mother to me, and Robert still calls me his daughter-in-law. "Michael may be our blood," he told me, "but you're our family." I used the settlement money to expand my consulting business, specializing in helping small businesses navigate complex financial challenges. The skills I'd developed planning Daniel's wedding led to a successful event planning side business. Rebecca Martinez and I became partners, creating celebrations that were built on honesty and transparency, rather than lies and manipulation. 2 years later, I walked Daniel's daughter down the aisle at her baptism, the honorary aunt who had made her parents' wedding possible. Michael wasn't invited to the ceremony. The greatest revenge wasn't destroying Michael's reputation or taking his money, it was building a life filled with people who valued honesty, generosity, and authentic relationships. It was discovering that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you married into. And it was knowing that every time someone watches that wedding video, they see what happens when you refuse to let manipulative people use your love against you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, publicly and completely, and let the consequences speak for themselves. Michael learned that betraying someone's trust and generosity comes with a price. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, can lead to a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything you thought you were protecting. The wedding I funded became the beginning of Daniel and Jessica's beautiful marriage, and the end of Michael's ability to manipulate the people who loved him. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.